Well, hello everyone. This is William Davis, Director of Education for Wilson Daniels, and I am sitting in sunny Phoenix, Arizona, where it is a balmy 90 degrees today, and we are waiting for Virginie Joly and Nicolas Joly of Château de la Roche-Moine to join us from Coulée de Sorrent, and we're going to talk a little bit about the 2019 vintage, as well as the history of the Coulée. So we are waiting for them to come on. As always, do think about some questions that you might have. Put those in the chat, and we will do everything that we can to get those questions answered, because there's a lot of information. When you're dealing with one of the pioneering figures of biodynamics, there's going to be discussion coming from Nicolas and Virginie. So we've got them coming on right now. Everything was tested and checked, and Wi-Fi's are wonderful, both here in Arizona as well as in the Loire. So hello, Nicolas,
hello.
Virginie, how are you? Well,
Fine,
thank you so Bonjour. So thank you so much again for spending some time with us. I know that it's rapidly approaching happy hour in your part of the world. You did mention that the weather was a little chilly, or maybe some rain outside in your neck of the woods.
It's windy. It's quite windy.
Windy and terribly dry. We only had water for having frost.
Wow.
Because we had no water for a long time, and the water came, and the next day -2 Celsius, and that was it.
Oh, well, I know it's been devastating for so many people. I was talking to I was talking to Vincent Coulon over at Beaurenard in Châteauneuf, and they had some damage there in Bédaride, Courthézon, and around the vineyards next to the winery in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that, everything is, we're looking for good news for the remaining vines and flowers.
The good news is that we are still alive, that it's not 100%. On Coulée, we are not so much affected. On the 7-year Vieux Clos, we are significantly affected. And what can we do? We can discuss it, actually. We tried homeopathic dilution with arnica, baldrian, and nettle, which had some effect, but when suddenly it's -3 with rain, I don't think there's any solution. So
no, I can imagine. Because he wasn't prepared for things like aspersion, or to do anything like that far south. Are you exercising any of those processes or techniques?
I bought many things. I bought propellers. I bought a system through gas which reach 86 degrees Celsius and normally goes 100 meters far, and it turns around on 3 minutes. I had some candles. None was really working. I think the only solution is to prune a bit later, so that the last buds are not out up to the 15th of April, when the frost comes. If the frost comes beginning of May, there's not much to do.
That's fair.
Formerly, we were freezing once every 30 years. Now it's once every 3 years, hopefully not more. Yeah.
Oh, it's such a shame. Yeah, Victor was saying exactly the same thing, that, maybe a late harvest, because that spared a lot of their vineyards down in the south of France. But how will that affect, at least in your opinion, how would that affect the ripening process?
Well, you see, I came back here more than 40 years ago, in the late 70s. Formerly, you were always harvesting beginning of October. And since now, 8 years, we're harvesting beginning of September. Maybe in 10 years, it's beginning of August, who knows? Which means that there is no problem with maturity. The other thing that you see is that you have much less rain than before. It's not dramatic. when you have been practicing biodynamics for a long time, your roots are very deep. And as we have here, the soil is made of rotten slate. It takes about 10 years for the roots of the vine, sometimes 15, to go through. Once the roots are through this rotten slate, whether it's wet or whether it's dry, it doesn't matter. You have enough humidity and you have drainage, enough way to get the water away. But it takes 10, 15 years. This is why, that's one of the reasons why we have very low yields, because our yields are about 1,500 liter to 2,000 liter by hectare, which is very small. But you see the problem we have here, an old vine, 20, 25 years, it can go on up to 60 years, have a fabulous capacity for catching in depth the originality of a soil. And of course, with time, you are losing some phytopharms. And the question is, should you take everything away? If you replant in between old vines, young vines, it doesn't work. The old vine have been taking the space. So if you take everything away, you are really moving away from quality for another 20 years. So we keep these old vines with the density which is less. Normally it's 4,500 feet by hectare. Now we are maybe 10, 15% lower. But when you see what an old vine is capable of achieving, you can't pull it away. So all this to tell that on one side, maturity is not a problem because an old vine can always cope with many problems. For a young vine, it's dramatic. A young vine, formerly when you were planting vine 40 years ago, you would plant the bloody thing and leave it and it would work. Today you have to assist it for 2-3 years, watering, cleaning. What it means, you have less life forces reaching your place, each place. And therefore, this is why actually biodynamics is becoming stronger, because what we do with biodynamics is just reconnecting at an energetical level your each place to the system which provide life on Earth. And therefore you have more life. But for how long, I don't know. And when I see what has happened in the last 40 years, you really question what happened in the next 20 years. On the other side, this is opening a huge door to homeopathic dilution. I could advise you have it in English. You were one of the first in America to publish it. That book, which was written already 40 years ago from Lily Colisco, called Agriculture of Tomorrow. And she made many experiments with homeopathic dilutions on plant. And you have pictures which show these huge results. This is fabulous because on one side, it brings a healthy plant and you feed yourself on a healthy plant. You feed yourself on a healthy wine. And for me, a real biodynamic wine is really a medicinal product. And step two, you balance the lack of life which reach us by increasing what I could call the acoustic. So this capacity of receiving from spring to autumn to fall, these life forces. And the last thing I could mention, which I find extremely interesting, now I'm looking at the vine while I talk to you. You can't see it, but I can see it. You have tiny buds. In 6 months, these tiny buds are becoming branches, then flowers, and then grape. This means that on 1 hectare or 1 acre, you have 1 hectare is 2.5 acres. You have several tons of matter which appear between spring and fall. And the point I want to make is that if you take the water away from these tons of matter, it's called dry matter, one should always keep in mind photosynthesis is 94%. The soil is only 6%. So what it means that the plant has a capacity of catching light, heat, whatever you want to call it. You call it sun forces, star forces, planet forces, energy, and bring it back at the level of matter. When this incarnation is well done, it's really an incarnation. When this incarnation is well done, if your place is a good place for vine, if you have the right cepage, the right root part, etc., not too big yield, many things, and certainly, maybe we talk about it later, none of these clones, because a clone is a copy of the same, and nature like diversity. If this is well done, it implies that in the cellar, you have the capacity to do very little. The more something is wrong in the farming, the more the music, I could say, that you have in your grape is unbalanced, the more your cellar should become an hospital where you check everything. But when you have a good place for vine, good yields, etc., good biodynamics, once you have the juice, the game is played. Everything will work well in the cellar, which means that you come up with a vine which is fully reflecting the originality of your place. And for me, this is very precious. I'm not saying it's better or not better. I'm saying that finally you have two sorts of good wine. Those who fully come from your place with almost nothing done in the cellar, and those where an enologue had to do a very important job to make the thing nice, to make it better, to improve it. But it's interesting to see that demand for what I call true vines with almost nothing done in the cellar, if it is good, because you can miss it. Huh? If it's good, that demand is really increasing very fast. And the test that you can do, because I think each individual should have the capacity to make his own experience. Follow a bottle on 10 days. Take half of a glass every day. What comes? Oxidation. Oxidation comes to aggress the wine because oxidation is a death force. And if your wine has been receiving life forces, these life forces are stronger. And you will see that the wine after 10 days is even better than when you open the bottle. And that for the consumer is a very interesting test because they can really see the aging capacity of a wine. When your wine is better after 2 weeks, it means if the storing is good, if you have not too much electric pollution in your cellar, etc., it means that you can keep it for 30 years, 40 years. It's very interesting. So all this to tell that what we mainly do here is what I call create the right acoustic. When you visit a good place on biodynamics, be silent, if it's possible, and listen. Listen if the place is a sort of reception. Listen, and you see it also with nature, with animals, with birds, etc. But on a good biodynamic place, you should have a sort of quality of silence, which means that this upper world creating, I would say, or bringing the forces which will end up in a grape, or if you make vegetables, it could be carrots, etc. But it means that you have been creating that sort of organization so that everything is devoted to these forces which come from upward. And that slowly leads the understanding to a medicinal product. Well, sorry, it was a bit long. I'm sorry.
No. It's I think that's extremely important. It's funny that you talk about the importance of site, and it needs to be a good place. And looking at the vineyard from a holistic perspective, yes, rather than it being more triage, as you're almost assuming that the fruit is sick as you bring it in, rather than it the vine itself and the place itself being healthy. So with that in mind, we when I think about Coulée de Serrant and specifically that vineyard, we're talking about 850 years of history. What makes it such a special place, And how did the Joly family come to be associated?
Yes, the vineyard is almost 900 years. It was created by Cistercian monks. And this sort of monks are very interesting people, because most monks would be devoted for praying, for going in a place called heaven, etc. With Cistercians, it's very different. The Cistercians were saying, we are human beings, capital H, and we will bring our humanity to the place where we are, and to help nature to express itself. They were mainly planting vines because you could see the result immediately, but also other things. So for me, a past is always a bit there on a place that you reach. And the question, the philosophical question you have when I came back in 1976, the question, how could I preserve it? How could I tune it to the present time? How could I give a meaning to my life? That's what we are talking about.
That's fair.
And in other words, as a human being above minerality, vegetal, animal, what should you do so that that place continue to express a song? All this is pure music. A song which will end up in a bottle. When I taste the wine, we made a group a long time ago called Return to Terroir in English, Renaissance des Appellations in French. We have now 200 and something members from 12 countries. The idea is true taste. When we have a tasting for this group once a year, for people who want, it's all free, who want to join the group, silence. The first question is not, is it good? The first question is, do you feel someone in the bottle? Do you feel an emotion? So we're not shooting for something perfect. For me, this is not the main point. We are shooting for seeing forces of a human person into a wine. And that's a very interesting process, because you return then to the deep concept of an appellation contrôlée. Appellation contrôlée were created for keeping a deep originality from a small place. Coulé-Tirant has its own appellation contrôlée, 7 hectares. We are 3 in France to have a small appellation which is entirely possessed by one person. And why is it an appellation? Because if you play that musical instrument, it's all music, if you play it well, you have something special in the bottle. And the concept was extraordinary, because if you have a small place from Alaska to the end of Chile, your taste was protected. So the concept is extraordinary. It has been weakened, unfortunately, because since enology has been making progress, we have the right as wine growers to have many additives, it's totally legal, which create a very pleasant taste, no question about this. But this is too often done at the expense of the originality of an appellation contrôlée. And the reason when you see organic coming back, biodynamic coming back, often through the deepest understanding of farming, you can avoid more and more assistance in the cellar. Therefore, you can return more to the deep originality of an appellation. And I find that tweet very interesting. The new generation is very much moving in this direction.
So in your opinion, when you think about, Rochemoine and Coulée de Sirent, and having that specificity, it's a very unique place compared to what you would find per se in Savinière. What makes the difference between the two?
Number one, the place. Because you see, in most spots here, the thickness of the soil is between 20 centimeters and 60. Number two, the slope. Number three, the proximity of the river Loire, which is in September, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the crop, you start to see 2 days out of 3 fogs, which stays up to 9, 10 in the morning. Sometimes we harvest, you don't see someone 5 meters away, and it's cleared up at 10, 10:30. So this creates condition for maturity, and the place itself, as I was trying to explain, when you have 900 years of history, and I would say of philosophy or spirituality, all this is mixed together, you have something special. And therefore, for me, my main goal since always is let's try not to break the music in the cellar. You see, so we do not act in the cellar. We check things. The fermentation is not 3 weeks. The fermentation is sometimes 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. I don't want new wood taste, but I want the shape of a barrel. I always tell the young people, one thing you should do before having your diploma for being a winemaker, try to sleep for an hour in a barrel. You sleep incredibly well because these shapes are fabulous. It's an egg shape with the two ends which are cut. So you see, people are moving to amphora, etc. But often I explain it in one of my books. Often the shape is a key point. Each shape is bringing a specific energy. So all these things, and certainly the age of the vine. Last point, extremely important. I don't want any clones here. So of course it's all Chenin, but it's Chenin. We always pick up our own wood to make a new foot of vine, and therefore the originality that you have on your place. Link, we could develop it later, to the 4 levels of matter: certain heat, certain light, certain humidity or rain, and certain geology. And all this you keep when you keep your own wood. And you graft it, not the grafted part shouldn't be a root which is more or less horizontal. It should come down. You see, a vine is the opposite of wheat. Christianity took the vine and the wheat as a symbol. A wheat is just an upward process, and a vine is just a downward process. One is dominated by gravitation, the other one by sun attraction. It's extremely interesting to see this, and you have to respect it. And last, I've been excluding these clones, because clone is 1 multiplied by 100 million copy. And within a Chenin, you may have 300 different personality, with resistance to disease, with flowering capacity, with maturity more or less early. We always harvest 3 or 4 times, spread on 3 or 4 weeks, with the same maturity. And when you taste on the same spot, the taste with 1 week delay, it's not the same taste. And you have people saying, oh, I like the first one better, others saying, I like the third one better. You mix it together, everyone is happy. So you see, if I tell it in another way, it's exactly like tuning a musical instrument. When you go in a music show and you see classical music and you see how these guys are for 10 minutes tuning their violin, you want to say, come on, stop it, it's done now, just play. No, you want it to be very subtle. Finally, farming should be the same for a vineyard. You know, it has to be subtle. So all this creates the music. Last thing I should have mentioned, we always try to have 5, 10, sometimes 15% of botrytis, of noble rot. So the wine is a little more yellow. Some people are disturbed by this, but after 3 years, it takes 3 to 5 years so that it becomes a unity. When the unity is there, the wine is extraordinary. And take the 2007, which has maybe 15% of botrytis. At the beginning, well, what is it? Oxidation, perhaps something was not right in the cellar. Now everybody wants it. There's almost no more, because you reach so that excess, it's an excess of maturity, not 100%, 10-15% excess of maturity, you reach a third level of deepness. And I find that extremely interesting taste-wise. So again, all these details finally permit to a place to be fully there in the glass. And that's why I rarely comment my wine, because we are all different people with different perception, and everybody could perceive it in his own way. So I'm not sure it's right to tell find this and find this and find that. I would say try to be yourself, be silent, and just follow what happens. And this inward process is very interesting. And the last thing, you have mainly two kinds of wine made here. Those where the year was hot, 2095, 97, 2003, 2007, for example, really a year of heat, intense heat, burning process. And those where the year is has not much heat, but a deep luminosity, which is more our climate. So the nights are colder. Whether you have rain or not, it's not so important, but you have always a nice light, you see these white clouds, but it's not a burning process. So the latter kind brings a sort of inward wine. The first kind make, look at my big muscle. And the other one say, I'm terribly refined. One is more feminine, the other one is more masculine. And this is not in our control. We just let it happen. And you have the vintages which are in between the two. But all this permit to have the song of the place. It's for me, I'm sure one day you will see that farming could be understood as music. If you are making carrots, it's difficult because you get your carrots are good. and 2 months later, it's forgotten. But when wine, it's very interesting. And when you taste a wine in a different place, the taste can be different. It's very interesting to see how the 4 levels of matter, which is a climate, how much heat, how much light, according to the seasons, according to your latitude. All this is affecting your tasting process. So, but over an opening, I would say in summer, 8-9 days, in winter, 2 to 3 weeks, with the bottle being at the end almost empty, just recorked, no fridge, leave the air. You see the image of the wine changing and being more precise and being there like us. I mean, we are young at a point of time, and with age we get different. But it's interesting to follow this on 2 weeks, and it could be done blind, because sometimes with psychic you can say, but if you do it blind, you see nothing.
Now, I do have a question. You talk about farming. So when we're talking about Massal selection, are those coming exclusively from the cuttings in Coulet or in the Sarant vineyard, or are they coming from, perhaps, other parts of Savagnières or the Clos de Bergerie?
No. An appellation, you are just the geographical organization.
Les sélections Massal.
Les sélections Massal. No, mostly Coulet, a bit of Rochemoine. I'm not sure. Maybe one exception, because I was planting 6 rows of a Savagnière non-grafted. People were told me you will have phylloxera, etc. I've never seen it. But phylloxera can be a real danger. But on 6 rows, no. And phylloxera is more danger on a sandy earth than a strong earth. But it could be that once or twice we took wood from the non-grafted vines, but it's not significant. No, it's we would like to see a pleasant branch of vines, which looks good and healthy. and we are not grafting ourselves. But I don't want this omega grafting. The omega grafting for me is terrible. I want this English grafting, you know, like this. And this is much better because an omega creates a barrier to the circulation of the sap. And therefore, you may have more problems behind. All these things are easy. It's not difficult. It's just a matter of common sense, of sensibility, and maybe a deeper, because with time, a deeper understanding of biodynamics, because biodynamics was not given by Steiner for being a recipe. Biodynamics was done as a departure for your consciousness to think more in depth about that system which provide life on Earth and which from spring, when the days are longer than the night, so the sun attraction is a victory towards the Earth attraction, you know, which is gravitation. And then in 6 months, you have to move from a bud to a grape. And you could push it much further, like 4 weeks before the harvest. You know, taste a grape 4 weeks before an harvest. It's not good. You split it. It's bitter, it's aggressive, it's unpleasant. Now, you can come up with the idea that the vines have 4 weeks to create a pleasant taste. Could I be helpful? You know, and then you can come up with ideas. I always do a treatment bringing the rose hip, bringing valerian, which is one of the biodynamic preparation, bringing sometime 50 grams of honey made on the spot by hectare through a dynamization, and bringing this on the leaves. What do? You are creating an atmosphere where the fructification can happen in a more easy way. As an example, I always explain, let's assume that you come up in a big room, you're a cleaning lady, and it's a big mess. Yes, you will do the job, but pooh, it's painful to do it. Now, if someone comes and tells you, oh, I can maybe give you an help, take a nice cup of coffee, you will do the job a bit better. So this is the image for understanding that you can come up with certain tea, and this could be explained more in depth, to help the vine to catch the taste which is around, but not there within the grape. So all this helps the understanding that farming should become an art. This is really the point I want to make. You know, the art of dealing with the right forces so that the place expresses itself at best, and so that what you eat or what you drink from that place has a healthy side. Yeah.
No, I love the concept and the idea of almost a vineyard caffeine. You know, that's you know, it's something to invigorate and get the vines moving, especially in those difficult vintages. Now let's talk about vintages for a second, because you know the past few years have seen lower amounts of botrytis. You know, as things have warmed up and you know you've had less humidity in the microclimate. So tell us a little bit about the 19 vintage and what your impressions of it are. Yeah,
19. You have some vintages which are difficult to deal with. Difficult. I mean, you always raise questions. You have some vintages where things happen on their own. 19, so same as usual, we have 3 crops, which we normally eat 3, sometimes 4, rarely. Spread on 3 weeks. Fermentation happens easily.
But very long on mine.
Very long. Yes, Virginie is right. Very long. 7 months?
8 months.
8 months.
Wow.
You never control. You see, this idea of controlling for me is a control is needed when something is not balanced. When something is balanced, why should you control? We could mention that for our society today, but so you let things happen. And the malolactic doesn't always come, but in 19 it was 100% there. And at a point of time, you get a really dry wine. Let me point out that I have always been fully working with my own yeast. I don't want to re-yeast. You see, your yeast are created by your four level of matter. When the heat comes, how much luminosity you had, how much rain and humidity linked to the geology. You have the yeast of the cellar, but you have also the yeast which are outside. And each place should have their own yeast. When you re-yeast, it's like if I ask someone who is not in a meeting to create a summary of the meeting. It's impossible because you have two sorts of yeast. It's aromatic yeast, which I discussed a little bit before, which I've always excluded. And you have this neutral yeast. But a neutral yeast put in your wine doesn't know the environment, doesn't really know what to do. You see? So why with your own yeast? Very interesting. We had some cuvées where we had 16.5 of alcohol and 0.1 grams of sugar, because the yeast were fully accustomed to the specificity of that place. So that I want to take advantage to tell that I will never harvest before maturity is reached. And to reach maturity today, it means that your wine is 14.5, sometimes 15. But have it blind, which I did many times here, with a good guy with great possibility for tasting. He would tell you 13, 13.5. So in other words, when the maturity is there, if the harmony is there, you do not taste a higher level of alcohol. But I think often when we taste, people who want to join our group, often you feel that the harvests were done a bit too early because the consumer doesn't want more than 13 or 13.5. And for me, it can be done at the expense of what the place would have reached if you had been waiting 10 more days. So 19 in all this is easy. Everything happened on its own. In March, the fermentation are over. You let it come down in the barrels. We do a pre-filtration because people don't want to have deposit in a bottle, which I can understand, but doesn't affect the taste at all. It's less convenient for the sommelier, but and you bottle the bloody thing. And last thing is sulfur.
But again, that pre-filtration is just gravity, if anything else.
Yes, gravity, and what we call pre-filtration is what you do normally before a filtration to make sure that so it takes only the thick parts. With this, you avoid mainly the problem of a deposit in a bottle, and you do not really affect the wine. And this is done on earth, on a earth with silica. It's not done on something else. It doesn't really affect the wine. But if you have the possibility of tasting a wine before filtration and after a tight filtration, you are really affecting the wine. Yes, the wine has the possibility to recover. I'm not sure the recovery is 100%. The recovery sometimes is a bit lower. So if you can avoid it, it's good. And that's it. Now, sulfur. Sulfur is
just because there is a question about racking before.
Yes.
Racking.
If we do a racking and how many times?
We do less racking than before. Why? Because when I move out the house, 100 meters away, and I smell the wine, I'm telling myself I would have liked that smell to stay in the bottle more than moving away in the air. So we do one racking, sometime two, not often. Yes. Right.
And that's according to vintage and just the vagaries of what's happening.
Yes, exactly. We really adapt every year depending on what would the wine need. That's all.
Uh,
No sulfur.
and that's it. Yes, sulfur. How can you protect the wine? It all depends on the pH. Normally, we have a pH of wine where the wine should need protection. I have a small greenhouse. To see if the wine is stable, I put 2 years ago a bottle of Kool-Aid. It's still there today. It went up to 45 degrees Celsius. The bloody wine is still there. So
Wow.
normally we do not need sulfur. Now, exporting the wine far away, you never know what happened during the transportation, etc. So we use a bit of sulfur. The question is which sulfur. We try to use a natural sulfur in a specific way, and this is interesting. Instead of normally when you bring the sulfur under the form of a liquid, I don't do this because sulfur is a fire. You don't put fire in water. So you burn in a small box in stainless steel. You have one hose bringing oxygen, so the sulfur is obliged to burn. You put your dose of sulfur, and you send the smoke directly without racking the sulfur in the wine. This is much more efficient, and the doses can be very small.
I see.
It's really a protection. I feel better. You see, over the world, I travel less now, but I've been tasting very good wine growers. I remember in Tokyo, I remember in Brazil. The wine was not there. The wine has been suffering because there was no protection. Maybe when you had a period of time in the transport where it was too high in temperature. But I think putting a bit of sulfur is a plus. Steiner was saying the earthly process can only come with sulfur. That's why you have always a bit of sulfur in the grape, huh? Not much, but a bit. And I think sulfur, you have, look, mustards, garlic, onions, cabbages, you have many plants which have sulfur. So I don't see any reason for creating a problem with sulfur. I think many foods today, because of modern farming, need sulfur. They have not enough sulfur. And I think a human being needs a small dose of sulfur every day. So I think it's for other reasons that sulfur was presented as an enemy. But with most wine growers with whom I talk, now today sulfur is accepted. And I think it's a plus. Now, does it change the taste? If you have big quantities, yes. If you have small quantities, blind, you don't find it. So
That's
we use
fair.
a bit of sulfur. Yeah.
Now,
And
what about
that's it.
bottling for you, Nicolas? I mean, when we talk about natural wines, and you're simply waiting for the wines to be ready before you deem them ready for bottling. Is there different times that you're bottling, or is everything being bottled at once?
No. You see, on the Chenin we have here, with the pH that we have, we made experiments. The bottling can be done within a year. It was not better when you were waiting longer. So for me, the bottling is done 1 year after the crop. And finally, if you compare the aging in about, remember what I said before, huh? I said, did you harvest with the right maturity? If you don't harvest with the right maturity, what I tell now will not be right. But if you harvest with the real maturity, after a year, you can bottle your wine. If for some reason, etc., the maturity is not rich, it's true that keeping the wines few years in a barrel could be better. But it's not the case here. It's not the case. For me, you see, the maturity, where sometimes you move away from the prescriptions or the normal understanding, is a key point. And like, if your voice is not perfect, you cannot make a nice song. In the same way, in the same way, with the right maturity, the flower is open. You wouldn't cut a flower before it is blooming.
True.
If you do so, it's true that with time and aging, something will return. But if you harvest when the maturity is really there, you don't need more time, and the wine can age exactly the same way.
So
this
in other
is my
words,
belief. Huh?
but so your bottling is the schedule is generally done, very quickly within a year. You're
Yes,
not
within
holding
a
on to
year.
different barrels and then waiting to bottle those later. It's
Yes.
all within a couple of days.
Yes, all the barrels that belong to the same appellation are blended together, and it's bottled in a row.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
No, that again, there's so many questions that we could possibly ask, in terms of the process and how you make the wines and what the approach is. What in the 40 years of making the wines biodynamically, and there are not that many people that got a chance to taste the wines before you employed biodynamics. So think of the Kool-Aid wines from the mid-50s when your family first moved there until 1979, 1980. What have you noticed about the wines?
Well, it's, you see, first of all, when you start biodynamics without knowing much about it, it's always the case at the beginning, the acoustic is not fully there. Number two, formally, because it was done always here in a very traditional way, but the harvest was taken away with horses and a sledge. It was primitive, which is good. Huh? So it was a lot of work to get the grape down from the upper Kool-Aid to the cellar. So what was done, it was in each wood bucket, you would crush the grape as much as possible to put as many as possible in each small container, which is a disaster. but the vine could cope with it. Number two, it was harvested a bit too early. But when you have a great musical instrument, even if you are not a great musician, you get good music. So the main things were, we never had heavy chemicals here. We had a few fertilizer, but that was about all. One pesticide was only made before I came. So the way my mother did it was, I would say, traditional. What changed over the years? You see, if you taste a Kool-Aid 84, 85, you will slowly see a change. It doesn't come like snapping your finger. Huh? It takes time. From the 90s, it's better there. And finally, over the years, this listening process is more and more active, I would say. And therefore, within what will become a grape, you could say that the music is more contained, is more in harmony, is more expressive. That's all. And then again, according to your temper, some people want a wine with I'm a strong person, and some people are the opposite. They are just those what you call Venus temper, where you just listen, see. I remember a woman telling me, I know nothing about wine, Monsieur Joly, but I can tell you that my wine is making me good. This is very much this inward process. And according to the year, the vintage, you have this difference of behavior. And then it's a matter of person. But all have the capacity for once the bottle is open to improve themselves for a long time. Now, according to the latitude, in winter it lasts longer than in summer. It depends where you are. according to the place where you are. Are you north? Are you south? According, is it in winter? Is it in spring? You see, spring is an upward process. Fall is a downward process. Each time it affects your taste. So wine shouldn't taste the same everywhere. If it do so, it probably means that technology has been quite deeply into it.
There's a
But
formula.
if you move to, you know, you have some fabulous wine, you don't know if they come from Chile or the north of America. Sometimes you can find the cepage, but for me, wine should be, but this is fine, huh? But I mean, my philosophy is different. I want to fully express a place, and of course, the age of the vines plays a part. What tea? I make many tea. You see, I make always tea of nettle. Sometimes I'm bringing other plants. I don't know the name in English. Each time, you know, if it is too dry, nettle is very good. Nettle is a process for helping the sap to move. As I said, for helping the taste with the maturity. You have assistance. And one extremely important point, which will be understood more and more, when you understand minerality, on top vegetables, and on top of vegetables, animals. For vegetables, animals are gods. It's an upper realm. They can move, they can go and drink, they can go in the shadow if it is too hot. On top of animals, we have human beings. And you have 9 more levels on top of this. Angel, archangel, etc. So what I want to point out is that when you bring on an estate, because here the vineyard is only 15 hectares, but we have about 45 hectares of land and wood. Number one, you need a landscape. Because through landscape, the diversity of energies are there. Number two, we bring and have all the animals here. It costs a fortune. I have 9 cows and a bull because I don't want the artificial reproduction. I have goats, I have donkeys, we have horses, we have sheep. All these kind of animals, it's like bringing more notes of music around. You see, biodynamics should feel itself on an organism. It shouldn't feel itself as a recipe on something. You want the diversity of because monoculture is a drama. For nature, monoculture is a drama. So you want a large diversity, and through that diversity will reach through photosynthesis will be taken in the grape, and also indirectly it means that the diversity of the microbes and the bacteria and microorganisms in the soil will be larger, which means you know that a root can never feed itself on the soil. To feed itself on the soil, the root needs the assistance of microorganisms. Like if I have in front of me very good things to eat and my hands are put in my back, I just can't eat. Same for the soil. So all what I describe, and this has been measured, permit to see a high density and diversity of microorganisms in the soil. And therefore, the roots can catch more subtleties of your geology. And so you see this plus the photosynthesis creates an originality. And this is what you can improve every year a little bit, because you come up with new idea or with new tea or with new dynamization and new impulse from your head, because this is a force, you know. We have a force from our brain, a force from our heart, and a force from our will. And when there is a vortex, you have two ways. You can go at a rugby game, or you can stay there and put your mind in the vortex. And all this finally is communicating, you know, and this leads us, but our world is not fully ready for this. This leads us to the understanding of the so-called elementary beings, because they are very active, for some for the leaves, others for the roots, others for the flowering linked to light, others for the maturation linked to it. But finally, all what I describe is feeding this invisible world. And I think the farming of tomorrow should go in that direction, and is already going a little bit in this direction. And so all this to tell that the more you move in this direction, the less you have to be active in the cellar, just checking. And the more you move in this direction, the more you have an originality in the bottle. This is, I would suffer if there was no originality in our wine. I would suffer, yes.
I can see that. So we had one more question about batonage. So what is the regimen for batonage?
If you harvest a bit too early, if you have huge containers, if your cellar is a coffin because it's all isolated with cement, you need to bring oxidation, because batonage means bringing air. It can be also useful with the right maturity and with the right cellar, but less. So we do it a little bit at the end of a fermentation, if it's a little bit slow. Yes, we do it once. Not systematic.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
less and less.
Just
Less,
to get things moving
yeah.
again. You know, it's more for the movement of the of the wine, of the liquid, you know, to kind of, you know,
yes,
jumpstart an energy.
Yes, it does. I'm not at all against it, but you see, I don't think we should be sticked to principle without moving to a deeper understanding of this principle. So yes, it's a plus. We did it more than we do it now. It's a plus, but it's not an absolute necessity. And then you could make an experiment on the same cuvée done with batonage or without batonage and see blind how it comes out. And one story I want to tell you, because that we always work as human beings with our mind. We have done that way. You have this great wine grower in Austria. The vineyard is Mein Klang. Il s'appelle comment, lui?
Werner Michel.
Werner Michel, yes. He did one experiment. He's, of course, in biodynamics since a long time. He was taking one piece of land, 2 hectares, spread in 2 parts. On one part, he would do the treatment that he had to do, the biodynamics, of course, no pruning at all. So at the end, your branches are 10 meters long. The size of the grape is tiny, but you have many. Between you and me, it looks a big mess. And then the other part is done as we know how to do it. But the interesting part is the blind tasting. Number 1, number 2. And often you prefer the one where you have done nothing. So it means that everything is relative, you know? Yeah.
Less is more. Well, you know, forgive me, because we could talk for literally hours. We have an hour limit on the Instagram.
Of course.
So we may have to do a part 2, or we will lose the entire video. So I cannot thank you enough for spending time and telling us all about the Coulee as well as what's going on at the winery. And yeah, maybe we should get in for a part 2 very, very soon, because there's so many.
Thank you very much for what you do. Thank you very much for your interest. Great.
It is
and
our
thank you
pleasure.
To Wilson and Daniel.
No, thank you so much for your time. It's an honor to speak to you both and to represent the wines here in the United States.
Great. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
toi qui coupes, non?